I did. I had a lot of vision for what it could be, but also there was a lot of limitations on things I couldn't do, because obviously there's limitations on implementing these HSI grants. And I just got really frustrated with, are we really just doing grant work, or are we actually serving? Because it felt like it was just grant work, and it was just monthly meetings and the things that I was working on. And that was HSI. And I just didn't feel like that was what it should be. And so I think that's really where a lot of the research that I do, the questioning, what does it mean to serve, really comes from that practice work that I did immediately following my completion of my program at the University of Maryland. That was the work I was doing. And so, yeah, it informs all of my research now on Hispanic-Serving Institutions and this idea of servingness.
Hello, and welcome to Student Affairs Now. I'm your host, Keith Edwards. Hispanic-Serving Institutions enroll more than 4 million students across the country, and yet most of the last 3 decades, serving has largely meant enrolling. Dr. Gina Ann Garcia spent years arguing that there's a fundamental difference between being Latine enrolling and Latine serving, and that the work of bridging that gap is the defining challenge of this moment in higher education. Her new book, The HSI Movement, tells that story through the voices of the grassroots leaders, organizers, and change makers who are doing the work from the inside. Joining her in today's conversation is a grassroots leader herself, Amber Gonzalez, who brings that lived on-the-ground experience to the table. Together, they'll explore what it actually takes to move an institution, not just its demographics, but its culture, its curriculum, its commitments, and its soul. Student Affairs Now is the premier podcast and online learning community for thousands of us who work in, alongside, or adjacent to the field of higher education and student affairs. We release new episodes every week on Wednesdays. Find details about this episode or browse our archives at studentaffairsnow.com. This episode is sponsored by Evolve. Evolve offers 4 leadership coaching journeys designed to expand capacity and build capabilities, empowering courageous leadership to transform institutions and reimagine the future of higher education. As I mentioned, I'm your host, Keith Edwards. My pronouns are he, him, his. I'm a speaker, author, and coach, empowering higher education leadership with and through the storm toward better tomorrows for us all. You can find out more about me at keithedwards.com. And I'm recording this conversation from my home in Minneapolis, Minnesota, which is at the intersections of the ancestral homelands of both the Dakota and the Ojibwe peoples. Let's get to the conversation. Gina, let's start with you. Tell folks a little bit more about you and your connection to this topic.
Yes. Hello, everyone. Thank you, first of all, Keith, for the invitation to talk to you today and to talk to the Student Affairs Now community. I'm excited to be here. My name is Dr. Gina Ann Garcia. She, her pronoun series. I'm a scholar mother of 2 human children and 2 poodles, toy poodles, and scholar of all things Hispanic-Serving Institutions. I'm also a professor at UC Berkeley. And prior to UC Berkeley, I was actually at the University of Pittsburgh. So some folks have followed my career, my scholarly career. I was at the University of Pittsburgh for 10 years. So shout out to Pennsylvania, but now at UC Berkeley, where I'm in the Berkeley School of Education, continuing to teach graduate students, but also undergraduates, as we have a large undergraduate program, particularly in our education program. I have a long career as a student affairs professional, dating back to when me and Keith were grad students together at the University of Maryland, which was a long time ago. So we go way back and have known each other a long time. So I do have a degree in college student personnel, worked in college student personnel or student affairs for a good number of years before entering the professoriate. So I think a lot of my work speaks to practice. People say that a lot. They're like, your research is so relevant to practice. And I think that's because I have the training as a student affairs professional, have the work, working in programs, in areas, developing programs, implementing grants, including an HSI Title V grant, which was where a lot of my frustration with HSI, I think, begins. Thinking about the connection to the topic today, I was a Title V grant implementer. And it was one of the hardest jobs ever. If you've ever implemented a grant, it's challenging, particularly when you didn't write the grant and you're just given it and told to go do it. And you have a lot of vision. At least I did. I had a lot of vision for what it could be, but also there was a lot of limitations on things I couldn't do because obviously there's limitations on implementing these HSI grants. And I just got really frustrated with, are we really just doing grant work or are we actually serving? Because it felt like it was just grant work and it was just monthly meetings and the things that I was working on. And that was HSI. And I just didn't feel like that was what it should be. And so I think that's really where a lot of the research that I do, the questioning, what does it mean to serve, really comes from that practice work that I did immediately following my completion of my program at the University of Maryland. That was the work I was doing. And so, yeah, it informs all of my research now on Hispanic-Serving Institutions and this idea of servingness. So I'll go ahead and pass the mic to Amber.
Thank you. And thank you so much for inviting me to join you all today. I'm super excited. My name is Amber Gonzalez. I'm a professor over at Sacramento State, part of the CSU system. I have been here for over 13 years. I think I'm starting my 13th year. Don't hold me to that. No, it's my 13th year as a full professor in child and adolescent development in the College of Education. And I think what part of my dissertation was really understanding how do institutional structures or how do students' perceptions of institutional structures shape their motivations and their persistence and sort of their wanting to continue with their education. And so I was not in the world of HSIs. I was really just looking at higher education, and I'm not trained as a higher education or organizational theorist. I'm trained as a developmentalist, primarily focusing on psychology. And then I started to see myself in a lot of the work in higher education. And then I started to think about HSIs and what HSIs are. I'm the product of a CSU, Cal State Fullerton, was where I did my undergrad. It was an HSI. And so I knew I wanted to be at an HSI. And so when I was looking for jobs, I started to look at the CSU systems and which ones were HSIs. Sac State had the demographics, but they hadn't yet become an HSI. But I was like, but they have the demographics, and it was just about, putting the paperwork together, putting the data together. And so I had this assumption that because they have that population there must be a lot of things happening at the institution to support that population. That was a very big assumption. And so when I got here and people didn't even know that they were an HSI or that they could be an HSI and what an HSI was, I was rather shocked. Then they had an HSI task force. I was like, great, I'll get on the HSI task force. After they received HSI status, that HSI task force went away. And so that was really shocking to me as well, because I was like, then what was that about? So I started to ask a lot of questions, which probably got me into some trouble because I started to realize people didn't want to answer my questions. And so that's sort of, I think, why I'm being labeled as this sort of middle leader, grassroots leader, is because I started to ask questions the minute I started on campus. And in order to change it, I wanted to be at an HSI because I wanted a system that serves people that look like me, right? That really focused on Latinx students. And I made an assumption that if you're an HSI, then you must do that. And then I started to learn more about servingness, HSI work, really started to dig into a lot of Gina's work, Marcela's work, Dr. Cuellar's work, Anne-Marie Nunez's work. And then I was like, oh, wait, my assumptions were all wrong. Now let's go backwards. And so that's kind of, I think, a little bit about me and who I am.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And I think Gina's framing of her experience, and then it's all her fault, Amber. The reason why you get to spend this time with us is because Gina said that you were this grassroots leader. And I think you spoke to that disconnect you experienced between enrollment and securing a grant and the servingness, which I think leads us beautifully to Gina. So tell us about how this book came to be. And I think you mentioned it, and we've actually been talking about it throughout this short introduction about this idea of servingness. If you can just talk about where that sits in all of this, I think that would be helpful.
Yeah, for sure. So The book is what we're calling the trilogy. That's what the publisher's calling it, or what my students call Act Three. Referencing to Beyonce. So either Act Three or the trilogy. Either way, it's the third book in the series, published specifically with Johns Hopkins University Press. So I've had three books with the same press, very highly successful books. So they like me to write more. And they're like, would you like to write the third book? And I'm like, sure, I'd love to write the third book. And I had been collecting data that I think fit really nicely. It was interesting because the first book is called Becoming Hispanic-Serving Institutions. The second one is Transforming Hispanic-Serving Institutions. And I was like, this book is not, it's something different, right? Like I wanted to go along with that sort of same, the gerund word for HSI, but I was like, hey, I'm going to call it the HSI movement, which is what I've been calling this movement, right? This idea that institutions enrolling Latino Hispanic students, a large percentage, doesn't make you an HSI, whether you have 10% or 20% or 40% or 80% or 90%. There are HSIs with 90% Latino students that are still not serving them adequately or intentionally, right? In the way across the whole institution, the way that we would imagine, right? The way Amber said she assumed, right, that they would be. And so enrollment does not make you a serving institution, Hispanic serving institution. And so the HSI movement is something I had been playing with for a little while, of this idea that, grassroots organizing happens oftentimes outside of organizations, right? The ones that we think about and that we see and that we would name, right? Like that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., right? Like led movements. We think of protests outside against institutions. This is a movement that's happening within the institution. And a lot of people have written about this. I didn't come up with anything new. And I referenced some of those folks right in the book. But this idea that social movements happen within the organization. And so when you're and social movements are all about change. They happen because we're trying to call for something new. And so the social movement, the HSI movement, is happening within, right? And that's what the book signifies, right? That like, yes, we're moving towards servingness, but we haven't got there, but it's happening, right? And I think the book really is, I've read it multiple times because I have to, when it goes into production, you have to read it, you have to edit it, you have to copy it, you have to index it. I've read it so many times already. And it really is, that's what it is. It's saying there's a movement happening within HSIs, and here are some examples of what the movement looks like. Mm-hmm. And these are real people because it's an empirical study. So I didn't make this up, although it's written in counter narratives. So it's written as stories, but they're all based on the empirical research. So here's what it looks like for people within an organization to be so dedicated to something that they can drive the change from within. Now, servingness, the question about servingness, been theorized since 2019. The framework that came out called the multi-dimensional conceptual framework of servingness and HSIs.
MCFC.
I think that's what it's called.
Yeah, you got it. It's MCFS.
I think that's what it's called. Yes. Servingness. So this is why we all just say servingness. There's a framework and it's called servingness, right? And so the servingness framework, although in the original framework, in the original article, nowhere does it say that it's an organizational change framework. In the past, 5, 6, 7 years, I'm like, everybody I see using it, they're using it to drive change. They use it very practically. It's very much being used in practice. I've traveled all across the country talking about the servingness framework because people are using it to think about how do they drive the movement, right? How do they become institutions that intentionally adapt to the student population? How do you adapt to a population that the institution was never for, right? And we know institutions were not for most of us. So how do you adapt to institutions or adapt to the students and make the institution, right? So even this idea of sense of belonging, I'm always like, I hate sense of belonging. If you've ever heard me say that, I'll tell you why. I'm like, we shouldn't have to feel like we belong. The institution should make itself feel like it's ours, right? Like, how does we flip that so that everybody does feel like we belong, but the institution has to do something different so we all feel that, right? Like, because what I need to feel like I belong is different than what somebody else needs. And a lot of that is based on our identities, right? Our social identity. So really thinking about identity-based work, right? That organizational change should be identity-based. We should be thinking about what Latino students need. Language comes up so much in Servingness because so many of Latino students are bilingual, not all, and in no way can we say we shouldn't consider the continuum of language, but there are many, many bilingual Latino students, and language is important to them. It's their community cultural wealth. It's what they bring to the institution. And we've never allowed them to fully do that and be bilingual and be bicultural in an institution. But what if we did? Right? What if we actually adapted to the students to allow for that to happen? So the third book really comes out as that, as like, this movement is happening. Here's some examples of what it looks like. And when people read it, I think there's going to be either they read it and they feel validated and say, I'm doing the right thing, keep going. Or they're going to read it and say, okay, this is what we need to do. Right. And there are many of campuses that are still in that place of like needing examples of how to move. But there's many that are moving and are going to say, I feel validated. Right. Like Dr. Garcia just wrote my experience, right? And for some people, it really is. It's the people that I interviewed are going to see their stories brought to life on how they've been working really hard to make servingness a reality in these in institutions. So that's how I think about the book. Mm-hmm.
Well, Amber, you've been around for the whole play, the whole 3 acts. So what would you add in this framing? And
yeah, I was going to say, because I know that Gina oftentimes gets put into the box that's HSI, right? I think like and so at Sac State, we're actually we've got the triple designation, right? We've got the ANAPZ, the HSI, and we also now have the California designation Black Serving Institution. And so when we talk about servingness, a lot of times people are like, they use the word servingness, but then they don't use the conceptual framework, or they don't talk about that organizational change theory. They're just now using this term. And so I think Gina hit it on the nail when she said this is about organization. It's a theory of change. It's organizations changing for the populations in which they serve. And so if you're serving predominantly Black, Latina, Asian American, Native American, Pacific Islander students, then you need to adapt your organization to serve those populations of students. And it might look different in different spaces on campus. And so one size doesn't necessarily fit all, but you need to be thinking about servingness through all of that. And so I think that's one thing that when I'm at the table, I continue to talk about that. And people are like, oh no, but Gina does HSI work. And I'm like, no, Gina does servingness work. And so it's about serving the students that are at the table, that may not be at the table. Oftentimes those students aren't at the table, but they should be at the table. And so I think that is one thing I just wanted to share, was that the work is for organizational change to serve the students that are there and the faculty and the staff.
Yeah.
And their families.
Yeah. Yep.
Gina, you framed this around some of my favorite things: emergent strategy, liberatory education, and cultural wealth. How are you applying all of this to HSI servingness, or as Amber just said, servingness?
Yeah, for sure. Oh yeah, servingness applies to ANAPZs and BSIs and all the institutions that are trying to figure this out for their population. So we do think of servingness as adaptable to other populations for sure. So emergent strategy is a change framework, right? I ground this book in the emergent strategy framework. Adrienne Maree Brown is an organizer. Adrienne Maree Brown is an organizer the way we would think of organizing, not within the organization, but outside the organization, and has led many of movements, and calls herself an organizer. And the emergent strategy framework really is about organizing to disrupt, institutions that are not serving minoritized people. And so the emergent strategy framework just really spoke to me when I first time I read it. I've read it multiple times. And it's just a beautiful, if you haven't read emergent strategy, just read it. It's just beautiful, right? And I think everybody that reads it probably gets something different from it, because it's very, it flows in all kind of different ways, right? And I think we all can interpret emergent strategy in different ways. But for me, who's a very practical orgy thinker, I'm like, okay, it gives me six processes. Okay, how am I going to move these processes, and how am I going to make them make sense in HSI world? And do we do these processes? And when I think about emergent strategy and servingness, I actually can now, I just use the word processes. And this is some of the other research that's going to be coming out is I'm moving into the action pieces, right? Whereas I'm calling Servingness framework static. It's static, right? It can be a snapshot in time, because you can use the Servingness framework to assess your campus and like a snapshot in time. But then now what do we do? Because some people don't move beyond the assessment. They just assess and then they don't know what to do, right? Because you have to then move, right? You need people like Amber who are like, all right, bet I can see the big picture, and now let's move in these different directions, right? And start to do that, and have there also needs to be some capital in your organization to be able to move. That's why there's a chapter about the middle leaders, because they're not the highest level presidents and chancellors, and they're not the folks at the classified staff. They're in the middle. They have some power. They are management level locked in. They are faculty who have some power, and they know how to use levers for change, right? And so the emergent strategy, I think, gave me a way to think about processes rather than just here's a snapshot of how you can assess your, the Servingness framework is a great assessment tool. I mean, you can assess it what are our structures? Where are we doing Servingness? And how are we measuring it, right? There are the metrics of serving. But the emergent strategy is process oriented. And so this book speaks about processes. And so I start to name them. And in some of the articles that are under review right now that will be out soon, I start to really name the processes, right? Processes of change. If we were going to become, and let me be clear, everybody has to become an HSI. Like the whole idea of being an emerging HSI is between 15 and 24%. That's false. 25% and on is emerging as well. 15 to 24 emerging, 0 to 25 emerging. Everybody's emerging because nobody's an HSI, right? Like all the institutions are trying to become and embody this identity. So everybody's emerging, no matter what. We're all emerging, and we're all trying to figure it out until we get to that point where we're saying this is the epitome of HSI. We haven't got there yet. There's a lot of disparate things going on where we're like, that's kind of an HSI. And that's an HSI in this one area. And over here in that other area, it's kind of an HSI. But we haven't got to an organizational sort of place where we say this is it. And so emergent strategy gave me the processes, right? I think it's all grounded in liberation. I talk so much about liberation and liberatory outcomes of like that our students should, those of us that subscribe to a Paulo Freire and sort of, bell hooks approach to liberation, that we all believe that education is a space where people should liberate it, right? It's a place where you should see yourself and feel like you are empowered, right? Like to do different things. You see yourself represented in educational spaces, and you are empowered to change the world, right? That's a powerful education. And so it's grounded in that, and it's grounded in community cultural wealth and in acknowledging people's lived realities, lived experiences, and they bring that to the institution, and we should embrace that.
Amber, you want to add anything to this before we turn to you more?
Yeah, no, I was just, as Gina was talking, I just kept thinking about until HSIs or any institution that wants to serve their population starts looking at their policies and their practices, there's no way they can say that they're an HSI, because those policies are often from, the early, I like to say like the 1900s, but that makes me like, oh, that was just a little bit ago. So like the early 1900s, the mid 1900s, a lot of these policies that were not made or did not envision students or faculty or staff of the communities in which they serve at the institution. And they haven't been changed. And so I'm like, how can you say you serve the population when you're still using policies that exclude the population?
Yeah, I have a good example real quick of that is so relevant right now at my campus, because I'm in the University of California system. I was just talking last week. I did a talk on campus, and we have the Black Serving Institution designation as well. And I made a very strong statement. I said, we are a BSI. And if we bring back the SAT, that is completely the opposite of being a BSI, because the SAT was grounded in the eugenics movement, right? It's grounded in racism. So like, we know that standardized tests are come out of the eugenics movement at this idea of trying to prove that certain races are more superior than others, and standardized tests embody that. So if we're saying we are about Black lives, but we care more about the SAT, those don't align. That's not BSI movement. That's not BSI ways of acting. So thanks for bringing in the policy, because yeah, that's where you
Yeah.
can really say like, you can say we have a Black Cultural Center all we want, so we're a BSI, but then you do things in your policy that would say no, no, you're not.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
when do they have to fully align, right, for you servingness to be actualized?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, I love that you brought in emergent strategy. I think for folks who aren't familiar, Gina described a book. It's very unconventional. It's not a hard read, full of poetry and Star Wars references and Star Trek references and so much more, and drawings and movement lessons from bees and
Mhm.
insects.
Yeah, biology, a lot of
Yeah.
biology.
And I
Nature.
just think that in the long run, we'll look back on Adrienne Marie Brown and think of her as one of the greatest thinkers times, like we think of
Hmm.
Bell Hooks or Maya Angelou or Grace Lee Boggs.
Hmm. Yeah.
And so I love that framing. So Amber, you're in this uncomfortable position that Gina describes you as a grassroots leader for HSIs. How are you doing this, and how would you like to call on others to join with you in this?
Yeah, I think very carefully.
Mm,
Um, because I think so. I'm a faculty member. I will start there. So there, and a full professor. So there comes a lot of privilege with that. But I would say that I started my um being a member of the Good Trouble Club, or maybe just the
mm,
Trouble Club at Sac State the minute I set foot on campus. And so my second day, I think, on campus, there was a meeting and they were talking about RTP, retention, tenure, and promotion, and they were creating a policy and they were talking about authorship of articles. And I will never forget that they were just like, you have to be this author in order for this publication to count, and it has to be in this type of journal for it to count. And I'm just thinking in my mind, I'm like, how, okay, check, okay. And then I think I just asked a question of like, why? Like, why does it have to have an index factor of that? And did you know that this journal doesn't really publish any qualitative work? And I was just all I was doing was asking
mm,
questions. And I was just it was just questions. Like I was like, I don't understand why. Why does it have to look like this? And I will never forget one of the men that was leading the conversation stood up and he was like, are we going to listen to this little girl ask us all of these questions? And I was like, is he talking about me? Am I the little girl in the room? I was like, oh, he's talking about me. So then I raised my hand again and I
mm,
was like, why are we referring to me as a little girl? Like I'm 30 some out years old and I have a doctorate. And then he referred to me as Miss. And I was like, oh, you can call me Dr. Gonzalez. I just have some questions. And then after that meeting was all over, I went into the bathroom and cried. And then after that meeting, I then called my former institution, CSU Northridge, and begged them to take me back. I was like, I do not want to be here. I don't want to be here. All I do is ask questions. And I remember David Wakefield, he was like, no, you need to stay there. We're not taking you back. We're not hiring you again. And keep asking all your questions. And so that's sort of, I think, when I just started to ask questions. I just wanted to understand why were certain things the way they were. But because
Hmm.
I was asking questions, I was now questioning these like white normative cultural practices and values that the institution had embodied. So I was starting to question things like, why don't we have a syllabus policy? Why are grades done in this way? Why don't faculty and staff have to share their syllabus with students during week one? Like, why is that not policy? Why why are these this way? Why I just started to ask a lot of questions. Why do faculty have to have a 4.0 teaching evaluation score in order to earn tenure? Why? Which then labeled me as a troublemaker. And then I just decided to take on the trouble. And I was like, okay, well, if I want to start changing the institution to better serve the students, I need to understand how how to navigate this space, how to change policy. Is this a policy or is this a practice? What's the process? What's the procedure that we have to go through? I quickly learned Robert's rules in order to understand where like how to make a motion to make an amendment. Where does the policy get consultation? How does it get enacted? Because I think that's the biggest challenge, is that a lot of people are like, oh, we can't do that. We can't pay students a stipend because the policy. And then I start to ask, well, can I see the policy? So I'll never forget, we were hiring a chief of police at Sac State. And it was right after Stephon Clark was murdered by police in Sacramento. And a lot of people had questions about, why do we have to have a chief of police on our campus? And all we kept getting told was, it's policy, it's policy. And then people just said, oh, okay, it's policy. And I was like, wait, we're just accepting that? Like, if somebody says it's policy, we're just like, oh, okay. And they're like, yeah, because it's policy. I was like, have y'all read the policy? No. So then I remember going into a meeting with President Nelson and saying, well, I'd like to read the policy. I have my computer open. Can you just put the link in the chat, or can you send the link via email? There was no policy. But people had already said there is a policy. And so I think the way in which people can start joining this movement is to start asking questions. It's going to get on lots of people's nerves, but you have to question this sort of white institutional culture that we've all sort of embodied. And you have to question, how are things done at the institution? Because that's where you can start. That's your like starting place, is to like, how are these things done? Why don't we have a certain center? Why is the SAT being used? I need to understand your underlying assumptions that you're making. And then also, is this a practice, or is this a policy? Is this a procedure? Because then it changes who I need to use in terms of my, not use, I shouldn't say use, work with, in terms of changing the institution.
A couple of things that I think are really important about what you've shared here is this good trouble, which is John Lewis's line about getting good trouble, and the power of asking important questions. As I think asking important questions seems innocuous, and we need to be declarative and have solutions and have the answers, but asking important questions can be powerful. And then also in that story, you will both have some moxie and sauciness, and you cried in the bathroom. And I think oftentimes we think that it's one or the other, right? That you have moxie and sauciness and nothing bothers you, or it really is hurtful. And we can have both, right? We can have the hurt and the pain and feel the dehumanization, and also stand up for ourselves and come back and continue to push and continue to nudge. What would you like to add here?
I was going to just add, that's why you also have to have a village in both places. You have to have the village for the sauciness that are going to like also, because oftentimes I'm at the forefront and people are like, oh yeah, I support you. I support this. And then when we get to Senate, where we're going to make a resolution or we're going to make an amendment, and they're ready to raise their hand, but they're not ready to speak in support of, right? So I think knowing that, and so having that village to make sure that people are prepared to speak, but then having the village for everybody that's going to come to your house later or call to check on you, to make sure that, hey, when the president attacked you, or when you felt attacked, or when somebody disagreed, I just wanted to tell you we're on the right track and you're doing great, and check in to make sure you're okay.
Or those colleagues at that other campus who lovingly said, you can't come back. You go, girl. Stay there. Keep going. Keep doing it.
They still won't take me back.
Those colleagues, that village is helpful too.
Yeah. I think what I would add is just to, I agree that, like, you know, this idea of asking questions is an important piece, right? But I think what Amber didn't get into with her being, you know, really a leader in this HSI movement is then, and this is what I see, people ask a lot of questions, they start annoying people, and then they start to figure out how they're going to do something about it. Right. And so Amber's, how am I going to do something about this? And particularly around the HSI work was getting a grant, right, from College Futures, a very large grant to work with students. And she started creating a lot of students who were also causing good trouble. Right. Yes. So then she multiplied. So then I think now we have a little army.
You go and you get the students to start recognizing and understanding. So not only now you have the faculty, oftentimes a protected group on campus, the tenured faculty, who do not use that power and that privilege always always. They forget. I feel like faculty oftentimes forget, like, no, you're tenured. Like, that's a very powerful position to be in. And now you can get students who are also in a very powerful position, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
students can demand, like, they can make demands of the institution, and they really can't have any repercussions of those demands. So when a student
Right.
says, hey, your HSI website doesn't even say the words Hispanic Serving Institution, what is wrong with you? Like, that is a
Mm-hmm.
problem, President so and so. And then the president's like, oh my gosh, I have to change that immediately. Or where on your
Mm-hmm.
homepage does it even say that we're an HSI? And
Mm-hmm.
within a couple of hours, that was changed, because now all of a sudden the students are starting to see and they're making demands, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think
Mm-hmm.
that when we got that grant, it was um, not, we really were just getting it as a research grant. That was really what was supposed, it was sort of like, okay, we're going to get this research grant, we're going to understand the student perceptions. And then the students were like, well, no, hold on, now I want to change it, which is when we were like, okay, this is actually a participatory action research grant,
Mhm.
and we're going to figure out the actions that the students start to make demands. Hey, we have all these DHSI grants, 5 million, 3 million. You get lots of publicity from the SACB on them, and we don't even know where the money's going. Where's the
Mm-hmm.
transparency? And so they started to then start to ask their questions. And they figured out how to get on the State Hornet. We had the SACB come because we had a
Mm-hmm.
journalism student who had the SACB come to her class to talk about journalism. And she was like, hey, do you want to come hear about our research project? And all of a sudden she's coming and telling Kevin and I, the SACB wants to come and hear about our research project. And we were like, okay.
Yeah.
And I remember Kevin was an assistant professor at the time, and he was like, you're taking the lead on this one, right? As a tenured faculty. And I was like, of course.
Mm-hmm.
So also
Yeah.
knowing where to position people that are in those
Mm-hmm.
protected spaces versus not protected spaces, to change, to maneuver the institution, to change the institution.
Yeah. Some strategy there.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's a whole lot to be said, but people can listen to Get Boss HSIs. Amber was on that podcast, and they described their whole project and how, and basically how they created the movement,
Mm.
right? And there's so many stories of HSIs, people creating the movement from within and getting students to join, and staff and faculty and
Mm-hmm.
board trustees. When you got some trustees in there, you're really doing the movement, and that's happening. People are like getting people on board. So.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Thanks for mentioning that. We'll get the link to your wonderful podcast and that particular episode in the show notes for this.
Mm-hmm.
I think I can't imagine anyone watching or listening who isn't thinking about the current moment that we're in, that we're living through this tumultuous moment for HSIs in general, which is to say the least. What do you see ahead for the future of HSIs? Amber, where do you see in your crystal ball ahead for the work, the movement, and some of the challenges that we're facing?
Oh, that's hard. I was just in a meeting earlier today. Well, I was in a space earlier today, and somebody was so proud that they were submitting an $8 million grant, not to NSF or something. And this was, somebody that, of course, my question asking, oh, and is it around our HSI work? And she said yes. And again, no Latinos are on as PIs. No. So I think this is a challenging time, and I think people are scared because I think we're having to look at the funding's gone, and so now we're having to look at our budgets in a different way, because a lot of the things that people were doing with the grants were never institutionalized. And so now
Mm-hmm.
we don't have grants, and so now they're
Mm-hmm.
going like, oh wait, were we actually doing servingness if we
Mm-hmm.
never institutionalized it? Which is
Mm-hmm.
a really hard question for these leaders to start to ask
Mm-hmm.
themselves and start
Mm-hmm.
to see that, oh, darn, we don't have the budget to keep these people employed that were doing all of the work to serve this particular population, and come this weird date, they're no longer going to be employed here. What are we going to do with this center? And it was never. So I think that that's a hard place to be. I would be saying that what needs to start happening is these institutional leaders need to start examining their budgets, which I don't think they do enough, because they were relying on the grants. And so now they're saying like, oh, darn, we don't have the budget to keep this afloat. What are we going to do? And, you know, because you can look at policies, you can look at practices, you can look at processes. These are all kind of free. But the minute that you say we were relying on those dollars to pay for this, and now we don't have those dollars, and you need to be transparent about that we weren't actually doing the work, and nobody wants to admit that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think the most tumultuous thing that has happened with HSI in the HSI world is that people who were funded by Title V grants have lost their jobs. There's tremendous job loss. I think we know there's tremendous job loss under this current president in general. He doesn't like to admit it, and we'll fudge the numbers, but many, many people have lost jobs because of a lot of funding that's gone away. And that's like, I call it collateral damage. There's the people who are directly funded, and then there's the like contractors and folks like me who were funded to come do talks, right? Like stuff like that. There's many, many, many people who have lost jobs and opportunities because of this loss of not only HSI and Title V funding, but all federal funding that has been now just gone. It's just gone, right? Like, and things that were really great things that were happening it's harder to make them happen without the funding. So a lot of loss that I think we need to acknowledge. But yeah, as far as how HSIs are adapting and responding, I think I'm really seeing a division between red states, blue states. Like there's that. The reality is the more, liberal progressive states, the blue states are still 100% committed, including ours that's in California. And California now has a state initiative to start an HSI, right? To start and launch an HSI state level policy, both HSI and NAPZ, and we already have Black serving. So, California's
that
already
doesn't
like
have
fine.
Funding with it.
Doesn't have funding with it. That part. Yeah. That's a whole separate, which now the BSI is going through is first you get the designation, then you have to ask for the funding, right? Two different parts. But Colorado has also just passed. They're calling it something around thriving institutions. And I was just in Illinois last week. Illinois is still doing it, right? So Massachusetts, right? There's places that are still like 100% committed. And then there's places like Texas with the second largest number of HSIs in the country behind California that has completely dismantled everything, right? And everything that I would even say has what I call the historical spaces of serving in the there's a new Servingness framework coming out, by the way. It's not out yet, but once it is, I'll share it with the community. But historical spaces have also been dismantled, like meaning the spaces that have been doing this for 60 years are also now gone. So not only the things that were funded by Title V grants, but stuff that had already been line items in the campus for decades have been dismantled, right? In places like Texas, right? Ethnic studies, cultural centers, women and gender studies, all that being completely just dismantled. So it's to say it's a challenging time is an understatement, right? We're having to rethink completely. And I think Servingness and the new book, are just going to continue to be the tools for people to use, because it is about really embedding it in who we really are, right? Because if it's in our core mission, then it's going to be what we do. And I talk a lot about enrollment-based HSI or enrollment-based minority serving institutions and mission-based. And the mission-based are your HBCUs and your tribal colleges. And they don't question, oh, now we've lost this funding, so are we still what we are? No, like you will always be an HBCU, you will always be a tribal college, and the HSI designation is not there yet because it's still enrollment-based. It's not in our mission. So once it's in our mission, then it's what we do. Everybody can make decisions about what they do based on our mission. And if our mission is to be, and I'll say minority serving institution, not just HSI, because there are many campuses, like Amber mentioned, her campus, that are, particularly in California, double and triple designations at this point, because we're just very, very, very diverse institutions in some states like California.
I really appreciate Gina, thinking and talking about the mission statement, because the budget follows the mission, right? So if you're a president of a university, or even the dean of your division, any of that, your budget has to align with your mission. Your strategic priorities have to align with your mission. So that's why HBCUs never have to question their identity as an HBCU, because their mission says they're an HBCU. They stand next to that mission, and therefore their budget's going to align with that. And so I think that's why I say, like, HSIs, BSIs, and APESIs are struggling, because while they got all of this Title V funding, did any of that funding to support different activities align with the mission? Was there ever a push to change the mission? Because then now that those have left, it's like, oh no, we don't have any line items in our budget. Oh, we don't have any strategic priorities that align with what those grants were doing. Amazing work. I mean, so even our students are missing out on some of the resources, activities that are helping them become a contributing member to society. And so I think that's where these institutions need to start looking at their missions and what are our missions, and do our budgets and our strategic priorities align with those missions, and is servingness embedded in that mission? Maybe not with the word servingness, I understand, but is there something?
Servingness is an allowable word. The federal government
is an
has
allowable
not
word.
banned
You
it.
can, I
So
can,
far.
that
So
is
far.
fine, but
They haven't
but
caught
I'm
wind of it
hoping
yet.
that there's a citation next to that servingness, because what I'm seeing also
Yeah.
is that people use the servingness. They even use the servingness framework, which I absolutely appreciate. And I want people to start using servingness 2.0. I did see a little pre of that, so I'm excited to see that come out. But we also need to make sure that we go to that foundational work and the foundational scholars that we're doing that work. So
yeah.
Sounds like the big push forward is to stop relying on the grant funding or enrollment numbers and integrate this into how systems operate, whether it's through the mission, through the budget, through the policies, through how we operate. That seems to be the way forward for
in a
folks who
weird
genuinely
way,
care about
that's
this
kind
work.
of like a blessing.
Mhm.
Using that very, very
Weird
like
way, weird way, yeah.
very, very weird. But I do see this as an opportunity for institutions to really start transforming, because I think they were relying on this funding. I mean,
Yeah.
our career center, we are going to find a way to fund it, but our career center was heavily relying on grants to support its activities. And now that that funding's gone, we're having to readjust and find funding in the budget. But I think it's almost like a blessing, because who doesn't want to have that career center be a direct line item in the budget, where I'm not having to think about this in 2028. It's already got a line item.
Yeah.
So it's almost like a weird, I'm going to use that very weird blessing.
It's forcing us to think differently. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I agree.
Well, thank you both. We are running out of time, and the podcast is called Student Affairs Now. We always like to end with this question about what are you thinking, troubling, or pondering now? And also, if folks want to connect with you, where can they do that? So, Dr. Garcia, what are you troubling now?
Oh, wow. Troubling. I mean, I'm going to be honest, in mainstream world, I am troubling why I continue to watch Love Island because
I
Love
did not
Island
see this coming.
it's like you got to connect with the folks, like Love Island. I'm sure a lot of folks watch Love Island, and I watch it every day, and I'm like, why am I wasting my life with this garbage? But then I know we find ways to make it make sense, and so I will keep finding that. So yeah, I think about things like that, like why am I doing this? Besides the work that I think about all the time, which right now is what I am pondering. I already mentioned this a little bit, was this systems change work is, what does it look like, and what are the processes, and how are we going to move it, and what other people have written about it, and how can I learn more about it? So that's where I'm really at as far as pondering in my work. But I'm a human at the end of the day. So yeah, I also ponder why I continue to watch Love Island. But shout out to Love Island. As far as people following me, you can follow me on Instagram and LinkedIn are probably the two places I spend the most time posting. My full name, Gina Ann Garcia, is how you can find me on both those spaces.
Wonderful. And Amber, what are you pondering now?
Well, I'm addicted to Love Island. So I do, which I think that you have to be right now. So reality TV is where I go to sort of decompress. And so it's either Love Island or reality Real Housewives, because I
Mm-hmm.
don't know what the ladies in Rhode Island are going to do. What's going to happen to the coffee shop? I don't know. I need to know. I need to know what's going to happen. And the Orange County girls are going to come back. But in Casa Amor just opened.
I
So on
did.
Love Island. So
I
that came
did.
out last night. So very interesting stuff in terms of my personal life. I think in terms of my like research HSI work, I think now that these institutions are starting to get these multiple designations, and now we have the state level designation in California, I'm really wondering like how students and their families are thinking about these institutions in terms of the cake and where's their slice of the cake or where's their slice of the pie, and how are we thinking about these institutions differently, similarly. I mean, they've been all over the news, and so I'm really interested to know how our families do they matter, do these designations matter to the families, do these designations matter to the students, in what ways are we interpreting what the designations mean for families, for communities. We talk about them a lot, I see them a lot, but I don't know how they're resonating with the communities in which we are aiming to serve. So that's something I'm really interested in, or trying to understand better.
Mhm.
So yeah.
Well, wonderful. Thank you both. This has been terrific and so much you've helped me make sense of so much. And I think helped so many folks lead forward through these challenging times with your perspectives and your insights. And as Gina mentioned, very practical approaches to how we can do some of this with some great stories. So thanks for your leadership in this space. Also, thanks to our sponsor of today's episode, Evolve. Given the current context of higher education, we need to invest in leaders with the capacity and capabilities to transform their institutions and the future of higher education. The Evolve Institute offers 4 leadership coaching journeys tailored to 4 different leadership levels. Each is a 3-month journey that includes individual and group coaching, plus a curated curriculum of short, asynchronous video modules. We also offer Evolve for leadership teams. If you're ready to evolve your leadership voice, visit evolve-institute.com to learn more. Huge shout out to our producer, Natalie Ambrosi, who does the behind the scenes work to make us look and sound good. And we love your support of these conversations. Your listening, sharing, and recommending makes all of this possible. You can help us reach even more folks by subscribing to the podcast on YouTube or our weekly newsletter announcing each new episode every week on Wednesdays. If you're so inclined, you can leave us a 5-star review. It helps great conversations like this reach even more folks. I'm Keith Edwards. Thanks to our 2 fabulous guests today and to everyone who's watching and listening. Make it a great week. Thank you both.